So I will now turn it over to you, Corey, to introduce yourself. And then if you want to have a little icebreaker of 2 truths and a dream, it's your choice.
That's fantastic. So we'll shoot for that. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Corey Watkins, and I'm an implementation specialist, and I work with CISIP, State Implementation and Scaling Up of Evidence-Based Practices. So I do a lot of implementation work nationwide. So excited to be here with you all. And today we're going to spend some time talking about effective communication methods and practices. And if you don't mind, you want to jump on into the icebreaker, you can feel free to, if you'd like to share out, or you can drop that in the chat. I think it was 2 truths and a dream. Is that correct? If anyone has 2 truths.
Yes.
Yeah. So 2 truths and a dream for me is I dream of being a concert cellist. I dream of being a professional singer who, may have spent some time traveling around to be prepared for this role and this opportunity. And I also dream of being able to live in several foreign countries as I do this. So any idea about what the 2 truths are and what the dream is?
So Corey, did you want us to guess? Sorry, my camera's not working, and this is Veronica. Did you want us to guess which ones are the truths and which are the dreams?
Yes. So which ones are the truth? And which ones are the dream, right? So one of them is a dream.
Okay.
And 2 of them are actually true, very true.
Well, 2 of them are music. I'm a musician too. I'm so glad to see music people in systems work. What up? That's awesome. And I'm going to agree with that. I'm going to say that being a concert cellist, professional concert cellist, is very difficult to attain. So I say that's a dream. But if you did it, I am super duper impressed.
Veronica, we're going to find out momentarily. I'm looking at some response in the chat. Give everybody else a second. Thanks for sharing out. Does anyone else want to share out before, or put their information in the chat before we share the responses? We got some good responses in the chat. All right. So I'll go on and respond because we're on time. We're moving pretty quickly. So there are 2 truths, but one of them is a half truth. So I was not a professional singer, but I was in a boys choir, and I traveled all over the states to sing around. So the state I grew up in, I was in a boys choir, not by choice, not because I don't like music, Veronica. I love music, which leads to the second truth. I did live in several foreign countries. So there's that. So the dream would be to be the cello. So Shane, I think you got that, right? So the problem is with the cello, I can't even play the recorder. So obviously being a, concert cellist would be very difficult for me. So hopefully not too tricky. Hopefully you got a couple of laughs out of that. Yeah, the recorder's amazing. Everyone else can play it except for me. So, hey. Well, again, welcome to everyone. We're going to jump right in. Yes, the recorder is amazing. And we'll jump into the session. So first of all, we'll start with a quick video for you. I'm going to fast forward it just one moment.
Organizing a baseball team here at the retired actors' home. And I am the manager. Now, you're going to be the manager of the retired actors baseball team? Yes. I would like to join the retired actors baseball team. Oh, you would? And I would like to know some of the guys' names on the team, so if I want to play with them, I know them, and I meet them on the street or in the home here, I can say hello to them. Oh, sure. But they give baseball players nowadays very peculiar names. A lot of funny names. Like Sticky Fields. Sticky Fields. Goofy Dan. Boopy Bobber. Booby Bobber. I know all of that. Yeah. Well, let's see now. We have on our team, we have who's on first, what's on second, I don't know's on third.
That's what I want to find out, the guy's name.
And then,
That's what I want to find out, the guy's name.
I'm telling you, who's on first, what's on second, I don't know's on third.
Now, Abby, you
Now-
want to be the manager of the baseball team?
Yes.
You know the guy's names?
Well, I should.
Well, you tell me the guy's names on the baseball
I
team.
say, who's on first, what's on second, I don't know's on third.
You ain't saying nothing to me yet. Go ahead and tell me.
I'm telling you.
You ain't said nothing yet. Go ahead and tell me.
Who's on first, what's on second, I don't know is on third.
You know the guy's names on the baseball team?
Yes.
Well, go ahead. Who's on first?
Yes.
I mean the guy's name.
Who?
The guy playing first.
Who?
The guy playing first base.
Who?
The guy on first base.
Who is on first?
What are you asking me for? I don't know.
Wait a minute, I got it.
Who's on first?
That's his name.
Well, go ahead and tell me.
Who?
The guy on first.
That's it. That's his name.
Well, you said it. I didn't ask you nothing.
You did.
You know the guy's name on first base?
Sure.
Tell me the guy's name on first base.
Who?
First
So we could enjoy the rest of this, but I think you all get the point, right? So communication is key. And it's how do we really communicate? How do we clarify what we're trying to, the message we're trying to communicate, as well as making sure that it's bi-directional communication. Those are some of the big things we're going to cover today as far as thinking about effective communication methods. So hopefully you enjoyed the video to get you started. And hopefully you're not communicating with folks like this. So again, we're going to spend a few moments today talking about communication protocols and really how do we make those connections to teams effective and efficient. So that's going to be our goal for the day. So ideally what we're thinking about is how do we make internal communication flow, right? How do we really make this work effectively? So just if you're looking at our example that we have here, what we try to think is, let's say something comes down, there's a policy change from the state, right? And the state implementation team is implementing a new innovation. Well, they're obviously going to communicate specifics around the implementation to the regional implementation team, who in turn will share that information with the district implementation team, who in turn shares that information with the building implementation team. So if we're thinking about a brand new innovation or a new initiative that comes from the State Department or from the state level, it will travel this pathway. Finally, it will end up with our teachers explaining to them how the innovation works, how the intervention works, how we're going to implement the strategy. And then hopefully we will share that with our students and we will hopefully lead to outcomes. Now, the way this works again with the communication is those outcomes that we're going to get, that's the information the students are sharing back with their teachers. We're then sharing that information and data back with their building teams. We're then feeding that back up to the district team, the regional implementation team, and the state team. So this isn't just one-way communication, it's bi-directional. Also, when you think about the building implementation team, it's broad, it says teachers there. The idea is it's teachers, every grade level there. So not only just one group, but how do we really communicate to everyone within the school? And the same thing when you see students, we're thinking about not only students, but parents and stakeholders who are not within the school building. So that's just something else to consider as we're going through this. So again, trying to make communication bi-directional. So we really want to be very specific as far as what we're trying to communicate, how we're going to implement something, and the steps we're going to take to get to that goal. So as we get into this really discussion of communication protocol, it's really a plan. Some people like to think of it as a guidance document, but it really describes how we communicate with each other. So many times we come up with we have the best laid plans, best ideas, and we say, okay, this is going to be perfect. But we really don't take time to think around our communication. If we refer back to our video earlier, the gentleman goes, he starts it off by saying, some of the baseball players have peculiar names. He doesn't clearly state the gentleman who is playing first base is Paul, what, or Jim, who, right? It's clarifying those things for the folks that we're actually communicating with. So we think about a communication protocol. It's down on paper. So it clearly outlines how frequently we're going to communicate, what the format will look like, and then just the parameters and who are the stakeholders we're sharing this information with. So why would we do that? Again, first of all, we don't always communicate success, right? We tell folks we're going to do something new. It's also important to communicate those outcomes and celebrate that success, right? So if you're rolling out a new innovation, new intervention, new strategy, make sure you're sharing back those positive outcomes, those positive trends you're seeing. Also, it helps you find out those barriers, those things that may be hindering implementation. And what you're trying to do is make those connections and say, which group needs to look at this? How do we need to communicate with them? All right. Also, it helps us address, past challenges. Is if we know we've struggled communicating with a specific group or set of stakeholders in the past, how do we make sure we're making the appropriate connections? And then again, it just brings all that back again, sort of like problem solving, and we continue to revisit this. So this is a living, breathing document. You don't just build it out once. Typically, you build it, you just need to make some, you may have to go in and make some adjustments and modifications. But again, you need to continue to revisit it to make sure that it's still serving its purpose and it's getting those specific outcomes. So when we think about this protocol, who is this designed for? Typically implementation teams and work groups. So as you saw from our first, from the chart that you saw, the image you saw, we started with the state implementation team, right? They're communicating with the regional implementation team, and they're drilling this all the way down to the district team to the building level. Again, if we do a good job with our communication, building out the innovation, and we're starting to see those outcomes, the students are communicating back to us what the change is and what's actually happening. So that's why we really this is focused on those implementation teams and work groups. So how do we do this? How do we build a communication protocol? Well, it's typically developed with, it's a collaborative effort, right? So you want to make sure you have the relevant parties available on the implementation team. So who are the people who are on the implementation team? Also, you want to think about evaluating for satisfaction, right? It's one of those things when you talk to folks around communication, well, what did you do? Well, we sent out robocalls. There's so many questions around that. How many people on this call answer robocalls, right? That's one thing to consider. Is that really effective? Secondly, do we have the right phone numbers for all our students? We know people change their phone numbers frequently, right? That's something else to consider. So we have to really evaluate our practices and our methods and say, is this getting us an outcome? Is this effective? Like the functionality is easy. Sure, we record the voice, we record the message and send it out, but is it actually serving the purpose that we're trying for it to serve, right? So we've got to consider that. And then after that, we take a step back and say, we may need to adjust this, right? Maybe it is social media. Maybe it is through Twitter. Maybe it is through Facebook. Whatever we decide on, we have to have the metrics that say, this is the way, right? We need to have some data that says, this is what we know our parents look at. This is what we know our stakeholders. This is how we should communicate with them. So we're going to jump into an activity really quickly, but really what we're going to do is I'm going to walk you through a sample communication protocol. As you look in your materials, this is already attached to your materials. You also have a blank copy as well. You'll also have an attachment with the blank, form so that you can actually say, okay, what would I do? How would this look? So we're going to kick out and just take a moment to walk through a sample communication protocol. All right. Just a little bit. All right. So, and again, this is on the National Implementation Research Network's website, but you actually have the material here. So when we think about the communication protocol, the rationale is really, we're talking about at this point, for this example, we're talking about from a state implementation team to a regional implementation team. And then the information is being shared back from the regional implementation team to the state implementation team. So if I were to have drawn arrows, it would be from state down to RIT, and then here would be from RIT back up to the state implementation team. So the big question, the big idea here is they're building transformation zones, which will build implementation capacity across all levels of the system. I'm not sure if you're familiar with transformation zones, but the general idea with transformation zones is instead of saying we're going to scale up a new strategy statewide or district-wide or region-wide, we're going to start with a smaller group, our transformation zone, which is a small sample of the schools within our area that we're supporting. And then we're going to actually take that and scale it up from our learning and scale the implementation up from there. So the idea is they're going to start thinking about how do they build out transformation zones. So if you look at the next section, it's the information to communicate. These are the updates, the successes, the challenges, and the barriers. Obviously, they look very similar, right? So we're providing those updates. We're sharing questions that are answered and then how we can move on, providing feedback, right? So these things, if you look, everything mirrors. Ideally, that's what's happening when you're implementing a new strategy. Anyway, is that it's mirroring down so that we can measure the effectiveness and go back and say, are we seeing our outcomes? So what SIT is sharing with RIT, the information the state implementation team is sharing with that regional team, is the same information that regional implementation team will share with the district teams, but it's also the information they're going to provide that feedback to the state implementation team around what our outcomes look like. So again, it is bidirectional communication. Now, if you look at the responsible individuals, we want to make sure we know who this is, right? So we're thinking our state transformation specialist, our system liaison, right? We'll look there. If you look at the RIT, it's going to be the RIT coordinator, who's going to be basically over transformation in the region, as well as that executive leader. So it's still making those connections. We have folks who are in similar roles, taking on similar tasks. Also, it's important to schedule. You know, when are we going to do this? Right? 2 times a month for pre and post planning debriefs. And then we have 15 minutes on an agenda to share out our progress and any barriers, right? So this is the same thing that's happening in the RIT. And when they're coming back, that feedback we're getting from them is part of that 15 minutes around progress and barriers. Again, just jumping into it, the format, there will be in-person meetings, there will be emails, phone calls that are followed up. And then also, if you're like me right now, everything involves an Outlook calendar invite. So those are just things to consider as far as making sure it's down, it's documented, how we're going to communicate, what we're going to communicate, you know, those pieces. And then also we wanted to build in a response timeline. Like how frequently did we want to respond, right? How frequently, especially to a barrier, right? Just that clarity, right? If it's a general information email or, you know, a typical email, that's fine, about 72 hours. But if there's a barrier, we want to get back to that a little bit quicker. And then also just the response format, how we're going to respond. So again, a communication protocol just really grounds us and helps us to understand our role as far as how we communicate, what we're going to communicate, when we're going to communicate. And again, obviously, hopefully these are practices that are solid so that they can be mirrored in other places, right? So that we won't have similar implementation strategies. So if we notice a challenge, we can continue. All right. So with that being said, I think we have around 10 minutes for questions, comments. So you can drop those questions in the chat or feel free to just unmute.
I'd be curious to know if you've applied the communication protocol to, I guess, maybe other means, like I'm thinking like social media. You know, we get information out various ways. And as of late, we've been trying to do a little more social media to get a message out if we're having a conference or professional learning opportunities. And so how do you go about this other side of it? Because they're not always really responding. You know, it's kind of a one-way communication. Is it somehow different in your eyes?
Well, so great question. So that would, you know, that social media piece, it falls in the information piece, right? So the big idea is we're going to share this. All right, who's going to be involved with that, right? So that may not be these folks. So that's really being more specific to drill them down and say, okay, if we're disseminating some information, and I think we've also added a dissemination plan. The idea is, okay, we're going to use social media, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, whatever you decide you're going to use. You've obviously determined, okay, this is the information, this is how we're going to present it. Who's the individual who's responsible for it? Also, when are we going to do this? So I used to, one of my former role I had, part of our communication protocol, we had a communication person. And the individual in that role actually scheduled out the tweets, right? So we could determine the frequency of how frequently are we going to interact with Twitter? How frequently are we going to interact with Facebook? So we could build the things in that we wanted to share, for the week, for example. You can set those tweets up to be sent out throughout that specific period of time. And what you're saying as far as it just being one way, it is one-way communication, but it's not, because we're going to get some type of metrics that let us know how people are responding to that. And those metrics are coming back. So as you're saying, like it would be from social media to the public, however we want to describe it. How's the public communicating back with us, right? So it tells us about their engagement, right? Let's say we're having Twitter chats, and we can tell by the number of folks who enroll and participate. So that information is telling us, okay, these things are working really well. This Facebook thing, maybe not as much. So we're going to spend more time on Twitter, maybe more TikToks. So those are ways that you can build this into a plan like this. So this worksheet still works for that as well. So you're just still building it out, because now you're saying, well, if we're not working directly with a team per se, because this portion is designed for teams out, the question would be, what are the outcomes we expect to see? And how are we measuring those? And that feedback is really the communication back with us. So we're still within our communication loop, because now you would say, well, Corey's in charge of looking at those metrics for Twitter. This person looks at that. So
Yeah, that's a good distinction. It didn't occur to me that the metrics could be used as a way of measuring some of that kind of two-way approach. So thanks.
no problem. That's a great question.
Corey, I have a really quick question. This is Veronica. I work with very small districts, very small systems with students, less than 100 students, and one person that teaches all high school math, that type of system. And when we did the district capacity assessment with them, talking about a communication plan, they said, we really feel like we don't need a communication plan, an in-depth communication plan, because we are so small. I wanted to know, what would CISA tell a small district about that piece? I know what I said, but I wonder what you would tell an itsy bitsy small district about the importance of this plan, even in very small systems.
Well, that's a great question, Veronica. And I think we're probably going to say something similar. What I would say is everyone needs a communication plan, right? The question I would ask that small district, if they say they're okay, is similar to the question before, right? Like, what metrics tell me that your communication, that what you're currently doing is effective? If you can currently show us what you currently have in place is providing the outcomes and meeting the expectations, okay, great. But if it's not, we probably need to consider a communication protocol, right? Because if they say, well, we don't have any data, well, they're not really sure if it's effective or not, right? I mean, it's small, and you think, word would travel is probably what the assumption is, but the question would be, okay, well, how many folks are coming to parent-teacher conferences, right? How many are showing up at events, right? So those would be questions I would ask them and pose to them and say, does your data tell you that what you're currently doing, your current practices are working for you? If they are, we don't just say, you have to just take everything out. But if it isn't, that's the question we need to ask and say, well, how can we make this better?
I've experienced this before, and I think one thing that I hear other people say as well is that like the question of, what if you leave today and whoever fills your role, are they going to know what to do? And so in some ways it's around sustainability of the practice, but I get it. Sometimes the principal is a teacher and also is the superintendent or something, right? In a very small district. So it's tough because they're not writing protocols to communicate with themselves. But if they do leave, then who's going to take their place and know what to do? But also maybe there's like an audit you could do to figure out who you're reaching out to, and if there are folks that maybe you've missed. And that might be a good opportunity, but yeah.
Shane, thank you for raising that.
Yeah, that's exactly what I said, Chen. Yeah, because there is such high teacher turnover in that district. I'm like, well, what if you left? Would this new, and then also a lot of alternative licensure teachers and teachers who are long-term subs that don't have that that experience, that classroom experience ever. So yeah, thank you. I feel better about my answer that I gave them. Thank you so much.
That's a fantastic point. A wise person once told me, if you think you have a really effective system and one person leaves, you didn't have an effective system. You had a highly effective individual. And it goes directly to the point Shane just made, right? Which is we want to build things to last, right? And if someone leaves and we don't have it and there's not a document, things get very interesting very quickly. Let's see. Any other questions?
Maybe just quickly, Corey, what are you using to measure success? You mentioned a few things like the analytics, which I thought was great, but are there other things that you might use as an indicator for whether this is working?
Right. So that's a great question. So again, whoever's building out this plan is tailored to them, right? So it's those communication. Who's actually coming to the, some things, it sounds terrible, but are they actually coming to the meetings, right? Are they responding to this? Are we getting the feedback? So it depends on those specific things. Again, the social media piece would be different because it's straightforward. We're not getting responses back from that. But if you're talking about, a sit talking about a writ, are they completing the task? So that again, it comes back to those questions around that 15-minute agenda and progress and barriers, right? Because if we're sharing information and we're asking for feedback, that's where it's going to come in. And we're going to say, we're not hearing from Shane, or Veronica seems to be on top of these things, or what's Bridget going, like those data points that we're going to decide, like how will we measure the effectiveness, right? So to you, it's really just depending on the innovation, what we're doing, what are we trying to see, will help us understand, are we getting our outcomes? So again, I think we're going to be wrapping up shortly. Big ideas to remember. Communication protocol is a living, breathing document. It's something that will need to be revisited, because just because it worked this year doesn't mean it will work next year. There will always be there will be a new app, there will be a new way to communicate. And we've got to make sure that we're able and willing to adjust to that and have the flexibility so that we can get to our outcomes. Thank you all for coming. I'm not sure how much more time we have, but really appreciate it.
Yep. So we are at time. There is another session at 3:35. The listings are on the depot page. So if you have the link to that, you should be able to identify which sessions you could go to next. And I believe all of the contact information is available, and the PowerPoint and resources, Corey, you've shared that with the team here. If not, we can facilitate that afterwards and make sure all attendees can get it.
Yeah.
Other than that, thank you, Corey, for a great presentation, and thank you, attendees, for popping in and having a robust discussion.